and the Quran's ability to address this in a unique way. And so those who expose themselves to the text and then follow the instructions of it separate themselves from those who don't when it comes to this issue and this matter. And at the end of the day, the theme that for me is that it's always been about change, and it's always about behavior. What is our behavior and how can we change it? And the deeper that we study the Quran and the prophets and the Sahaba and ourselves, the deeper that we realize it has to be a study of the self. Because what's the goal? It's that we want to be the most best aspirational versions of the self, of ourselves. And if you really pay attention to the Quran, it's a story or stories of the best of us, knowing we'll never achieve them. We'll never meet Ibrahim alayhi salam. We'll never match Asya. We'll never match Maryam alayhi salam. But they are there as markers and for us to assess. But the point is that we have to do the best in this life with what we control. And there's a theme here. We do the best in this life with that which we can control. And so I want to give a lot of the parents here today what I think is one of the best things I've ever come up with. One of the best arguments, one of the best points. But I think it's the things that come extracted from the Quran. And in the last couple of years, I'll tell this story. In this area, as well as in New York and other places, I want to go through some things that have happened. There are many boys, many kids, many girls who have struggled with losing control. And losing control in many different areas and in many different things. So as an example, I remember sitting with a boy that, it started with an iPad addiction. And then it became video games. And I remember sitting with their parents and saying, watch out, be careful. This thing is a slippery slope. High intense sugar, whatever the case may be. And then it became, he wanted a smartphone. And he was the first kid to get the smartphone. And I remember telling the parents, I'm not fighting about the video game. I'm not fighting with you about the phone. You don't understand the point. You're setting this kid up for failure. And they didn't see it. All the other kids at school do it. How could we be any different? And we saw the slippery slope occur. Years later, that kid, his friend, and the other kids, we started find out later on, the first ones to get addicted, not only start smoking, but to get addicted to vapes. Not only start smoking marijuana, but got addicted to it. It got so extreme that a number of these kids developed a disease that's now called CHS, where they can't even eat a meal without smoking at the same time. Years later, I remember sitting on the floor of a psychiatric ward with the exact same kid. Fully lost control. And then there were girls who were addicted to gaming, and then addicted to the attention, and then all of a sudden, some people get so addicted to attention that they're talking to people that they meet online. They're not even talking to their parents anymore. They'd rather listen to this person online, and then we find out that someone disappeared and went to 300 miles away to meet somebody that they met off the internet, and we find out later they've been talking to this person 2-3 hours a day for 2 years. And it's not about the specific act. I don't want you to think about the game. I don't want you to harp on the phone. I don't want you to harp on the social media. I'm not trying to make you think about that. What I want you to harp on is the compulsion, is the excessiveness, is the extremeness. Because we are told by Allah, وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا, and do not be excessive. إِنَّهُ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُسْرِفِينَ, and Allah does not love those who commit excess. Muslims who pay attention, who read the Quran and read the text, and this is what I found amazing about the set of parents who studied Quran and the set of parents who just, maybe they memorized it but they didn't understand it. What they were able to see that something that may be considered halal but it had the ability to be addictive. It had the ability to be compulsive. They knew, hey, watch out, hold on. This vaping thing, watch out for this. This gaming thing, watch out for this. This phone thing, it needs restrictions. Because that which can reconfigure the brain, when the brain gets wired to be addicted to things at 2, then 3, then 4, then 8, then 18, it's hard to train that brain to get unwired. And it can be. And years later, that same boy became the most healthy kid I ever saw, stopped doing all of that, hit the gym, became great at what he does, but he had to go through a decision and a process to let go of everything that had addiction associated with it. And the word addiction, remember Allah said, He does not love excess. He commands us, do not do excess. The definition of the word addiction is excessive engagement in a behavior. The word excess is in the definition of addiction, and Allah is telling us, do not be excessive. Allah does not love those who are in excess. So if tomorrow you come up to me and there's some new invention that comes out of the block and it's halal, but you could see that people start losing control. You start seeing that people do it all the time and they can't control the ability to get off of it. You should have what I call is a Quranic radar. Whoa, hold on. Let me think about this thing. This TikTok algorithm, 8 hours a day, 9,000 times a day we're touching our phone. I'm not saying the phone is haram. I'm saying who amongst us wants to have lost control? Allah at the end of the day manages us and tests us and questions us on that which we have control over. And this is the other thing that I want you to pay attention to. It's not just that one boy. It's not just that one girl. It's not just some of the things you might see from your kids. But all forms of addicted things are on the rise. All of them. You look at gaming addiction, it's on the rise. You look at phone addiction, it's on the rise. You look at porn addiction, it's on the rise. Gambling addiction is on the rise. And what they do is they keep loosening the laws and the rules to make it easier and harder for our kids and ourselves to not get lost in excess. And so that's why they call this the age of addiction. There's a fascinating book called The Age of Addiction. If you can watch the YouTube video on it, I would highly recommend it. But what I also found amazing as I was looking through all this over the last 10 to 15 years is that the Quran goes after the things that lead to excess. If you look at the 10 or 8 major addictions that are out there, alcohol addiction, gambling addiction, weed addiction, right? All these major addictions that are out there, our Quran and our text, even porn addiction, it addresses that. The Quran combines it. And 3 times in the Quran, when it talks about gambling and alcohol, it combines them. And I remember sitting with a scholar, and he was like, isn't it fascinating? Why are these 2 things combined together? Why combine khamar with maisir? Why did Allah put these 2 together? And then how does Allah describe them? In one ayah, Allah, the translation says, the shaitan only wants to cause between you, to be caused between the people, animosity and hatred through intoxicants and gambling, and to take you away from the remembrance of Allah. Allah gives us examples. He's highlighting at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there were Sahabi who were alcoholics. They weren't just drinking, they were addicted to alcohol. Wasn't that they were gambling, they were addicted to the gambling to the point where they lost control. And then Allah emphasizes these addictive elements is a tool of shaitan. Addictive elements are weapons to cause animosity, to cause hatred, to break people. I remember seeing the boy fight his father over the weed addiction. Physically fought his dad. And then that's the next time I saw the same boy was in a psychiatric ward. It was exactly as Allah described. These are weapons to cause animosity and destruction. And so many of you may think this is heavy, but there's hope. Inshallah, the second part of the khutbah, I will address this and an advantage over this. But I, to this day, find it amazing. How is it that in DC, which is one of the highest addiction cities in the world, like the most Alcoholics Anonymous, this Anonymous, all the anonymous programs related to addiction, DC has the highest rates in the world. Where you have power, you have a lot of addiction. And you will see that all the addictions that today, 1400 years after the Quran addressed it. The fact is, when Allah put boundaries on something, if you really pay attention to in the Quran, when Allah put rules, all the places where Allah put rules are things that fall down the slope of addiction. He put rules on gambling. He put rules on alcohol. He put rules on sex. Be careful how you engage. It's halal with your wife, but you can lose control. And you could, that's an addiction. He put rules on looking. Lower the gaze, because there's a point where you lose control. He put rules on getting looked at, the attention, because you could lose control on the amount of attention, like that description of that girl who was catfished for 3 years and was willing to leave her parents and her kids for someone she never saw a video of, a picture of in her life. If you pay attention, Allah says the rules that I give you in the Quran, it's not for my benefit, it's for your benefit, but you don't know. Think about it like boundaries. Allah designed the human, and He knows the nature of the human, He knows the brain of the human, and He put boundaries. And those boundaries, if you keep exceeding them, can fall down a slippery slope where there's no return. And so Muslims distinctly have lower rates of addiction than other communities. But when we leave the Quran, and when we leave the religion, and we leave the understanding of the text, we fall in the same paradigm. قولي قولي هذا أستغفر الله. بسم الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. بسم الله. One of the greatest things that developed out of this was, I want to give this khutbah in a whole new way. Imagine you're sitting with one of these young men. You're sitting with a young man who says, what's wrong with the phone? I remember sitting with another young man, what's wrong with smoking weed? I have anxiety. I'm speaking with another young man, and he's like, what's wrong with drinking a little? It's good for your heart. Look at this clinical study. All of us have heard all of these arguments. What's wrong with vaping? It's better than cigarettes. And they'll sit with, I remember one kid debated a nephrologist for an hour about the health benefits of vaping. All right? And I think the nephrologist used to come to MakeSpace, and he's like, what is wrong with these kids? All of these things, we could sit there as parents. I'm giving you parents what I think is a superpower today. You could sit there and argue with your kids about the specific thing, like the video game, or you could argue with them about TikTok, or you could argue like this. Underneath all the things that we're worried about or bad, sexual relations to intoxicants, all of it is that underneath it, if you look at the theme or the pattern, is the ability for that thing to become highly addictive, to be compulsive, to the point where you lose control. And I remember when I sat with the boy and I said to him, I'm not trying to control you, because that's what they think. I want it so that you don't lose control. I want that your brain is not wired in such a way that it's so easy for you to get lost in these addictions and these compulsions. I don't want to control you. I want it so that you don't lose control of yourself. No kid, no parent, no child, no young adult, no daughter or son of ours says, I really want to become an addict when I grow up. Have you ever sat with an addict? Whether it's a drug addict or an alcohol addict or a sex addict or a love addict or a weed addict or a gaming addict, someone who has lost so much control, all you see in them is misery and depression and anxiety and loss. No one wants to be in that state where they are in a state of deep humiliation. The greatest humiliation you will ever see amongst a human will happen to an addict. Whether it's the drug addict, or the sex addict, or the gambling addict. They will take themselves to places where you say, La ilaha illallah. How can a human take themselves to this deep place? And then when you understand the brain and the way that Allah designed us, you say to yourself, I don't want to even put in the tools of addiction into my child. I want to protect them from those tools of addiction. So when you argue from that perspective, number one, no one wants to be an addict when they grow up. Two, the worst, the most extreme, the most negative nature of a human, show them the most extreme case, is when they become an addict of something. So bad habits lead to addiction. So before you fall into the addiction, let's just pull back. Let's start seeing the radar. Let's see it, how it goes from here to a slippery slope. Give them the radar. Give them the basira. Give them the insight so they know. 3, today, 2024, I have daughters, I have nephews, I have nieces. You want your kids to just have a massive advantage over every other kid? All the other kids are addicts. They're gaming addicts, they're phone addicts, they're TikTok addicts, 8 hours a day on their devices. If you're a 14-year-old kid, if you're a 13-year-old kid, if you're a 10-year-old kid, and you want to destroy your competition in high school, college, and really have an edge on life, one thing, learn how not to wire your brain to this stuff. My daughter, when she was 13, came at me with the whole phone thing. Now I'm a tech guy. I study phones. I studied addiction. I studied behavior change. I knew the game. And I was like, I ain't giving you a phone under any circumstances. And then I have the stats. Social media, just as an example, if a boy starts using social media in middle age, 25% higher rate of suicide. If a girl starts using social media in middle age school, 75% higher rate of suicide. I know the data. Higher rates of anxiety, higher rates of everything. If you look at when the phone launches in 2011 and you look at the chart of anxiety and depression, they match exactly parallel. So when you're sitting with them, you have the data, you have the evidences and the proof. And then on top of that, I know that they hired addiction engineers. Have you ever heard of this term? Google it. Addiction engineers out of Las Vegas, and they put them at Facebook. And they put them at TikTok. And they put them in Google. These guys aren't your friends. If you're a 14-year-old and you're on TikTok 8 hours a day, that wasn't your choice, buddy. If you're touching your phone 9,000 times a day, you were compelled to do that. The top 10 richest trillion-dollar companies in the world are addiction-making companies. Facebook, Google, Nestle, the sugar company, Coca-Cola, the sugar company. We reward crack dealers today. And I want you as Muslims to realize we're the best of people. We're the best of generations. We guide humanity away from excess. Allah described us as ummatan wasata, the nation of balance, which is the opposite of the people of excess. Think about our description. Think about our nobility. Think about how we have a massive edge. Muslims are leading. We're the most educated in America. We're becoming the most wealthy in America because of little rules, like we're not becoming alcoholics like everybody else, because we're preventing ourselves. We're just not falling into the traps of addiction. So all you parents and all you kids, gain the addiction radar. To all the parents and all the kids, learn about the addiction traps. And not only is it that your kids will be saved, forget that. Don't do it to be saved. Do it so you have a massive edge over everybody else. Do it so that you succeed in everybody else, so that you already will have a better shot at a better career. You have a better shot at making a family. You have a better shot at better health. You'll be a better shot at being a better man, simply because you didn't follow the fad and the trend. We're not like everybody else. We have the ability to have foresight and insight. Allah subhanahu, the Prophet ﷺ in a hadith told us that for every single disease And this is the quote, there is no disease that Allah has created except that He has created the remedy and the cure. This issue of addiction, this issue of compulsion, this issue of excess is one of those things where distinctly the Quran speaks and addresses it in a way to pull you away from it, to not fall into it. And again, it's not to control you. To all the kids here, your parents are not trying to control you. They're trying to make it that you have an edge and an advantage so you don't lose control. And He says to us and to the adults and the parents, you're like, you're talking about the emotions and the behavior. But Allah talks about in Surah Al-Qiyamah, and He promises, وَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِنَفْسِ اللَّوَّامَةِ, and He goes, and I promise and I swear by the self-reproaching soul. What does that mean, nafs al-lawwama? What does it mean that each one of us, we're commanded, He's promising it, that we have a soul that self-analyzes, that we have a soul that self-criticizes, that we have a soul that reflects on our behavior, that we reflect on our action, that we reflect on our tendencies, and that we constantly push to aspire for better. None of us here want to be people that say, you know what, when I grew up, I lost complete control. I lost complete control of myself. I struggled to focus for 2.5 seconds. I struggled to be able to tell myself to do something, and then I couldn't have my ability to do something. No one wants to be that person. And just by taking a few things away, and by showing people that all the bad things that the Quran addresses has one underlying principle underneath it: excess, addiction, compulsion, loss. And I don't want you to lose. We want to win. We want to gain closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This nafs al-lawwama, studying of the self, looking into yourself, is a spiritual act. Analyzing yourself and your feelings and your emotion and your behavior is a spiritual act. And there's hadith, right? An hour of reflection is better than a night of salah. An hour of reflection is better than a night in prayer. Study the self, look into the self, and give you, your family, your kids, the advantage that they deserve. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إسرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا. ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. أقيموا الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر.